So friends, just when you think Donald Trump's dirty DOJ leadership, Pam Bondi and Todd Blanche, can't possibly get any less ethical, they up and surprise you by trying to undo, dismiss, throw out Steve Bannon's criminal conviction for contempt of Congress. Let's talk about that because justice matters. So friends, under the corrupt leadership of Pam Bondi and Todd Blanche, Donald Trump's Department of Justice is disintegrating, crumbling before our very eyes. And this orgy of injustice just expanded in really unexpected ways after there were new revelations about Steve Bannon in the Epstein files. What has the Department of Justice just done? Here's the new reporting. This from Politico. Headline: Justice Department seeks to wipe out Bannon conviction for defying January 6th committee. And that article begins, the Justice Department is seeking to erase the criminal conviction of longtime Trump advisor Steve Bannon for defying a 2021 subpoena from congressional investigators probing his role in the January 6th attack on the Capitol. In a motion signed by U.S. Attorney Jeanine Pirro and without the signature of any career prosecutors, the Justice Department asked U.S. Judge Carl Nichols to dismiss the two-count indictment that DOJ brought against Bannon more than 4 years ago. Nichols, a Trump appointee, presided over a week-long jury trial of Bannon in 2022 that resulted in his conviction on criminal contempt charges. Federal prosecutors brought those charges in November 2021 after the Democratic Lee House voted to hold Bannon in contempt. The January 6th Select Committee convened that year by Speaker Nancy Pelosi had subpoenaed Bannon to describe his contacts with key organizers of the January 6th rally that preceded the attack on the Capitol that day. They also hoped to learn details about his contacts with President Donald Trump in his efforts to subvert the results of the 2020 election. The end of the case, that is if Judge Nichols grants Jeanine Pirro's motion to dismiss the case. The end of the case is in some ways symbolic. Bannon already served a 4-month prison sentence in 2024 for his conviction on the charges, but he has appealed his conviction to the Supreme Court, which was awaiting a response from the Justice Department before Monday's move by Pirro. If Nichols grants the motion to dismiss, it would likely end the pending Supreme Court case and erase Bannon's jury conviction. Trump advisor Peter Navarro was similarly tried and convicted for defying the January 6th committee and is also appealing his conviction. Navarro has said he wants to pursue that fight rather than seek clemency from Trump. Like Bannon, Navarro spent 4 months in prison. Okay, friends, let's try to unravel this one. Let's start with the basics. There's a federal rule of criminal procedure that applies when prosecutors first bring a case and then move to dismiss a case, which almost never happens after the case has gone to trial, resulted in a conviction. The defendant was found guilty. The defendant was sentenced to prison. The defendant served his prison term. The case is long over, and then the prosecutors try to dismiss the case. First of all, it makes absolutely no sense. I'm not saying it's impossible, but let's start with a federal rule of criminal procedure that applies anytime prosecutors bring a case, indict somebody, and then decide to try to dismiss the case. It is Federal Rule of Criminal Procedure 48 for anybody scoring at home. And it reads as follows: dismissal subsection A by the government. In other words, by the prosecutors. The government, the prosecutors may with leave of court dismiss an indictment, information, or complaint. So friends, the 4 most important words in that rule are with leave of court. Prosecutors can only dismiss a case if the court grants them leave, gives them permission to dismiss the case. Now, put a pin in that. We're going to circle back to it in a minute, but now we have to look at Jeanine Pirro's motion to dismiss Steve Bannon's case, his conviction, to see what it says. And don't worry, it won't take me long to read it. A good 12 seconds maybe. In the case of the United States of America versus Stephen K. Bannon, defendant government's unopposed motion to dismiss indictment pursuant to Federal Rule of Criminal Procedure 48A, the United States of America by and through the United States, Attorney for the District of Columbia, respectfully moves this court to dismiss with prejudice the above-captioned case against defendant Stephen K. Bannon. The government has determined in its prosecutorial discretion that dismissal of this criminal case is in the interests of justice. Defendant Bannon does not oppose this motion. Conclusion: wherefore, the United States of America respectfully requests that this motion be granted. And friends, it is signed by exactly 0 career federal prosecutors, 0 public servants. It is signed by exactly 1 Trump flunky U.S. Attorney, Jeanine Ferris-Pirro. Well, friends, I'm glad Jeanine cleared it up for us because, of course, the basis for this inexplicable motion to dismiss Steve Bannon's criminal case, his criminal conviction, is because it's in the interests of justice. Well, with all due respect, U.S. Attorney Pirro, that is unadulterated horseshit. Dismissing Steve Bannon's case, his indictment, his conviction is not in the interests of justice. But, you know, friends, we have a couple of relevant, even important historical data points that show how the Trump administration has been involved in this corruption, this searing injustice. When it comes to Donald Trump's friends and criminal associates, we saw it in the first Trump term. We're seeing it in the second Trump term. 2 important data points. 1. The prosecution of New York Mayor Eric Adams, and 2. The prosecution of former General Mike Flynn. Let's start with the Eric Adams case. We saw that in this Trump administration, the second corrupt go-round. The Department of Justice, the federal prosecutors at the Southern District of New York, U.S. Attorney's Office indicted New York Mayor Eric Adams for all kinds of public corruption crimes. And then what happened? Well, Trump won re-election. He sent one of his henchmen into federal court in New York, Emil Bowe, who, God help us, is now a Court of Appeals judge. And Bowe tried to dismiss the indictment of Eric Adams, the criminal case against Eric Adams, and he tried to dismiss it without prejudice, meaning if the judge granted that motion, the Trump administration could hold that case over Eric Adams' head so he would continue to be a good little mayor and do exactly what Donald Trump wanted him to do. Because the reason Bowe gave was not that there was some deficiency in the evidence, the proof that Eric Adams committed all kinds of public corruption crimes. No, they wanted Adams to be in a position to help Donald Trump with his political priorities. Mind-boggling how unethical a reason that is for seeking to dismiss a criminal case against a high public official because you want him to be able to help Donald Trump out with his political priorities. And the judge, the presiding judge, Dale Ho, was having none of it. So, Judge Ho eventually ruled that, okay, I may have no alternative but to grant a motion to dismiss, but I reject Emil Bowe's request that I dismiss it without prejudice so the Trump administration can hold it over Eric Adams' head and I am dismissing it with prejudice. Small consolation, but it was probably the right call by Judge Hope. Second important data point, the prosecution of Mike Flynn for lying to the FBI. Mike Flynn, who was in court twice, pleading guilty to the crimes he committed. That case was presided over by Judge E.M.T.T. Sullivan, something of a lion in D.C. criminal justice circles. I've had cases with Judge Sullivan, and after Mike Flynn pleaded guilty not once but twice to lying to the FBI, Trump's dirty DOJ leadership filed a motion to dismiss the case against Mike Flynn, who'd already pleaded guilty to his crimes. And again, Judge E.M.T.T. Sullivan was having none of it. Why? Because it clearly was not in the interests of justice. It was contrary to the interests of justice, to the security of the nation, to the oath of loyalty Mike Flynn took to, protect and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And I was in court covering that matter the day Judge E.M.T.T. Sullivan took Mike Flynn to task and said, "You, sir, arguably disrespected everything this flag stands for," with Judge Sullivan pointing to the American flag that stood behind him in his courtroom. And ultimately, Judge Sullivan did grant the Department of Justice's motion to dismiss the criminal case against Mike Flynn after he pleaded guilty to his crimes. So, friends, that brings us to the final question. Why now, 4 years later, why in the world would Jeanine Pirro, one of Donald Trump's flunkies, file a motion to dismiss a case that is over, a case in which Bannon was convicted by a jury of his peers and served a prison term? Why now? Well, friends, we don't know because Jeanine Pirro didn't tell us in the motion to dismiss, just claiming implausibly that it was in the interests of justice. But one thing that we do when we're investigating crime, when we're prosecuting crime, one thing that a jury does in virtually every criminal case that is tried in every jurisdiction in our country is the following. Judges will instruct jurors that they are entitled to draw reasonable inferences from the evidence they have available to them. The evidence that the parties, the prosecution, the defense introduced during the course of the trial. They're not bound only by that evidence. They are allowed, indeed, they're encouraged to draw reasonable inferences from that evidence to try to conclude whether ultimately somebody is guilty, whether the prosecution has proved guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. And there is something in the political reporting that I think gives rise to a reasonable inference about why now. Why dismiss Steve Bannon's conviction all these years later? Here is what Politico reported. Pirro's motion to dismiss Bannon's case comes amid renewed scrutiny of Bannon's close association with convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, a relationship revealed in the recent congressionally mandated disclosure of millions of pages of documents from the Justice Department's investigation of Epstein's purported sex trafficking ring. Okay, friends, so the question becomes, what reasonable inferences might someone draw from that revelation that, Steve Bannon is named in the Epstein files in any number of ways in a recent disclosure of Epstein documents? And shortly after that disclosure, what happens? Jeanine Pirro files a motion saying, we want to dismiss the case against Steve Bannon. Well, friends, I couldn't help but think about what just happened with Ghislaine Maxwell, Jeffrey Epstein's convicted co-conspirator in that sex trafficking ring of underage girls. She was hauled before a congressional committee and she pled the Fifth. She invoked her Fifth Amendment, right against self-incrimination, and her lawyer said she ain't testifying. But the reporting is the lawyers added, now, if Donald Trump would be willing to give her full clemency, just give her a get-out-of-jail-free card so she doesn't have to serve the remainder of her 20-year prison term, then she'd be happy to testify and, fully exonerate Donald Trump because she's prepared to say he did nothing wrong. He's as pure as the driven snow. And if you give her a get-out-of-jail-free card, she's going to be willing to say that. I'm taking liberties with the details, but you see the game Ghislaine Maxwell is playing. Don't you believe, friends, she would say anything that Trump or his flunkies wanted her to say to try to implausibly clear Donald Trump? Is there something similarly at play in this new Bannon revelation with him being in the Epstein files and all of a sudden Jeanine Pirro, Donald Trump's flunky, saying, we want to dismiss the case against Steve Bannon? Don't know. Is there a reasonable inference that all of a sudden the Trump administration is willing to do this enormous favor for Bannon? Because what might he have some information that this administration doesn't want seeing the light of day? Don't know, but I would urge you to think about it and draw your own reasonable inferences. And now I think what will happen, friends, and I covered the Bannon trial. I know the prosecutor, former colleague. I know the defense attorney who represented Bannon, also a former federal prosecutor. It was a strong case. There's no doubt that he committed these crimes, and it's a righteous conviction, and he served a prison term as well. He should have. But the question becomes, what does the Judge Carl Nichols, do next? Well, if it were me, the first thing I would require before I acted under Rule 48 and decided whether I was going to grant the motion to dismiss Bannon's conviction is demand that it be briefed up, because this summary assertion by Jeanine that it's in the interest of justice carries zero weight. You get no presumption of regularity, Jeanine, that you know that horse is now long out of the barn when DOJ is presumed to be acting in good faith. Doesn't apply anymore. And another federal judge said as much in recent days. And you go ahead and submit your brief and explain why it is you're moving to dismiss this conviction. And then we'll litigate it. We'll hold the hearing and we'll see what in the world y'all are up to. And I just hope Judge Nichols gets to the right result, a supportable result that is actually in the interests of justice and of the American people. Because justice matters. Friends, as always, please stay safe. Please stay tuned, and I look forward to talking with you all again tomorrow.